I see a lot of names we know and a lot of people we don't. So that's always good that our friends are with us and we make some new friends as we go here. So as Mark mentioned, this is the first in what will be a quarterly series of webinars from QRX. And we're going to focus today on this concept of quality culture and how do you get one if you don't already have one. Whoops, get on the right screen here. And then, all right. And so, in the hour we're going to first, get an agreement on, right? What do we mean when we talk about quality culture? What is this thing? Because there is no standard for it or standard definition. But we'll offer up what, we think are signs of having a quality culture. Then we'll talk about the opposite, right? What are the indicators that should tell you, yeah, you probably don't have a very good quality culture. And then we'll talk about the, ideas for then how do you build one so that you can at least improve, not have a really well functioning quality culture. All right, so let's start with that basic. I think one of the most important things, to establish, your organization truly has a quality culture is seeing quality as being a business value driver. We like to use this term value beyond compliance, especially for those of us who work in regulated industries. And I think the majority of our participants today are in that space. We get really focused on the regulatory bodies and on the standards. And everybody kind of pushes this, yep, you have to comply, comply, comply. And we lose sight of the idea that quality provides you a lot more than the ability to comply with standards or regulations. I think in a true quality culture, that's understood, right? That quality is simply one of the ways in which you drive business value, and that's it. That's what it brings to the table. Compliance just happens to be, the cost of doing business in the regulated space. So focusing on the business value first is more important than focusing on your ability to comply.
And that should really be reflected too in your financial systems, right? The quality cost centers ought not just be an overhead area. There ought to be some some return on that investment. And so you have to figure out how to get that done between and also a lot of this ends up being what is often termed soft costs. But I think you really need to understand, what is the quality organization bringing to the business. So keep going, Steve.
Yeah, well, that was a great segue into the second bullet, right? Around the planning aspect of a good quality culture is that your quality objectives are considered part of the business objectives. And I think that ties in what you're just saying, Mark. If you're not making, quality, a forward consideration, when you're planning out the business and its objectives, you're missing this key component, right? Because if we agree that quality does provide business value, then why would it not be part of the business planning process? In a good quality culture, they don't separate the two. This is probably the easiest one, right? Just that there's a really high bar set. In organizations that have great quality culture, they are never satisfied with good enough, or they're just never satisfied, right? That they are always, that idea of continuous improvement, continual optimization, they keep pushing forward, right? It's just not, oh, we pass all our audits. Our complaint rate's not that bad. Our warranty costs aren't that bad. That's fine, right? And that kind of attitude of complacency is not usually a good sign, right? That your quality culture is particularly strong. Good quality cultures will, excuse me, keep striving to move further and further ahead, understanding that kind of ties back to meeting your business objectives, providing business value, because if we keep getting better at this, then we're better than our competition, and that's better for the business. So there should be some connective tissue you see between all of these. The customer drives everything, right? So how do you know you're successful, right? Only one entity can tell you that, and that's the customers. You really can't decide for yourself that you're being successful. It's the customers who validate everything you do. The end of the day, we all have some sort of customer. Those of us who are in the excuse me, in the med tech industry, you always kind of have two. You have the people who buy your devices or your drugs, and the people who ultimately get them, the patients. But that's really where your definition of success comes from, is from that side. You can pat yourself on the back and think you're doing a great job, right? But it's your customers who will tell you. And if you focus your metrics and your planning around that concept, another good indicator that, this is a good quality culture. Accountability. This is a big one, right? So this idea that everybody understands their role in quality and that they have a role. Everybody. If the attitude is, oh, well, quality is for the quality department, then that's not really a strong culture. In companies that have these strong kind of quality cultures, everybody knows their role, everybody knows their part of it, right? Um, and going along with that, I think I've got a bullet on this later, but that quality is part of the team, right? And I think I've got a slide later that says they're not the police, something like that. And then because of that, right, then the employees actually engage in the quality system and in the activities going on. They understand why they're performing their jobs, not just how. It's easy to train people on how you want things done, and I talk a little bit about that later. But if they truly understand and are truly, believing in the value of the quality system, they will do it because they understand the why of what they're doing. It's something that's been interesting. I've been in places where I've just walked around and I just talked to employees, people down on the floor, and they're making some sort of widget. Excuse me. And then I asked them, so what is that for? And they just kind of shrug. That's just the plastic part comes off the machine. I don't know. So then how do you know when to make good decisions about when to stop the line or when to report that something's not right if you have no idea of the context? And unfortunately, that's really pretty common. It's just I come in, I do my job, I was trained, right, to the procedure, and I just do it. I don't ask about the why, or I wasn't provided the why. I was just told do it this way. That's not engagement, right? And that's why, companies that allow for that, typically then they're wondering why their cost of poor quality isn't under control. And it's because nobody knows why they're doing anything. And then they're not able to participate directly in ensuring that quality is at its highest levels.
And I'll have to say, Steve, in our core industry, in the medical device industry, that's probably less common because it's easy to get engaged when you understand how you're affecting somebody's life from a medical device standpoint. I even use it, within our own company and say, when we go to clients, our why is to make sure that, the patients are taken care of. They have the best medical devices that are available on the market and help those devices get to the market where there's an unmet need. And that's our why from QRX. And so hopefully organizations are taking that on as well.
Agreed. And then leadership. I often wonder what went, when that word popped out, what went through your head? And the key is in a good quality culture, leadership is not title dependent, right? Everybody has an opportunity to lead in some way, maybe as a thought leader, but the organization doesn't require you to be a director or VP to be the leader of something. That people are, we used to always say, oh, employees are empowered, and that kind of became sort of cliched. But this is what that's about, right? That if everybody has that autonomy, that freedom to lead, right, then you have an organization of leaders who are then engaged, they're accountable, right? And you start to see, you track back through all the previous bullets, and they all start to connect because everybody now is truly part of the quality system. And that's really what a culture is. As it says, everybody's got a common understanding and a common mission and objectives, and they are all marching in the same direction. And that's when you'll see really good things happen from there. So let's look at the opposite of that, right? So what are the indicators that you are not yet there, right? That your quality culture is maybe not established or not a particularly good one.
And let's say
Again,
these are not unrecoverable things.
That's true. Yep.
Just some things that we point out so that people have the awareness that you might want to have some conversation about how can we create a better culture.
Exactly. So in some ways, I'm reversing a lot of the previous bullets, right? The first one, right? If the quality planning is totally separate from the business planning, right? Your top leadership is not really connecting the dots here. As I talked about before, that really there is no difference between a quality objective and a business objective. They should be the same, but we do see this a lot when companies go through their, so-called AOP, annual operating planning. and quality isn't invited to the table, right? Oh, well, quality objectives, yeah. Apparently, we have to have those. Quality will go take care of that for us, right? But here we're talking about how to run the business. If they have that kind of attitude, right, they haven't really embraced the value of the quality and the quality system, and the culture is clearly not there, and they're not going to get the results that they really should at that point. Another good indicator, right? We know by standard or regulation we have to hold management reviews of the quality system, right? If your organization gives you an hour to do that, but when they hold their business reviews, that goes all day or half a day, right? Something's a little out of balance here. You could argue almost that really the quality system reviews should take a lot longer than your business reviews. But we often see that in organizations. Again, they get so focused on quality is this separate thing and this management review stuff that just happens to be something we have to check off a list. Hey, we have a business to run and we got to talk about profits and things like that. So another good indicator, right? If that's what's happening in your organization, then that could be a challenge. I worked at a place once where I was brought in to change the quality culture, and luckily I had good support there. But this was one of the things that first sort of jumped out at me, because when I said, all right, I want to run my first management review, and the CEO asked me, he goes, all right, how do you like to run those? And I said, well, I'm thinking about 4 hours. And he kind of looked at me and went, I don't think we've ever done one over an hour. Because what would we talk about for 4 hours? And I said, all right, how about give me two? And let's see how it goes. And he went, all right, I could sell that. And then I just had a really well structured agenda and I got everybody talking. It wasn't me just presenting at them. And it was great. I always remember this, the VP of sales, because again, sales is usually one of those parts of the organization that doesn't quite see themselves as part of the quality system or really understanding why they have to go to the quality management reviews. And at the end of the 2 hours, the VP of sales walked up to me and said, this needs to be a longer meeting. Right. It's like, there we go. We're already on our way. So I hope everybody gets to have an experience like that someday.
And I'll add on to that. If your QMS review is simply a review of past performance and not an actual discussion of what you're going to be doing going forward, again, that means that you don't really have a good, solid foundation in, quality understanding, quality planning, so that, if you, like I said, if you're just looking at metrics and that past stuff, you probably don't have the right culture.
Yep, agreed. I think this one everybody will get, right? If there's this attitude, as I talked about before, good enough is considered good enough, right? We pass our audits. We don't have a high level of complaints, right? Because complaints are totally going to tell you how good your product is. And that's a whole nother discussion, maybe another webinar. It's just on correct monitoring of the performance of your products. But again, right, this kind of attitude is a killer, right? And clearly doesn't get into that idea, that spirit of continuous improvement, and seeing quality as really being beneficial to the business results. That this is a very lackadaisical approach, and typically indicative of an organization that wants to minimize that burden of having a quality organization and having a quality system. It's usually a very scary indication.
And what came up for me when you started talking through that, Steve, is that, being proactive, and we've had conversations where, you want to say, let's proactively talk to our customers and ask them questions about the use of our product, doing surveys and that kind of stuff. And if you have comments from your other people in your organization, will saying something along the lines of, well, that means we're going to get more complaints. That's kind of an indication that maybe you don't have the right culture, because you should be seeking out information with regard to your product, asking for that proactive feedback. As we talk through the medical device industry, and people are really a little bit upset about some requirements in the European regulations that talk about proactive post-market surveillance. The question is, why don't we all do that? We should be seeking ways to make our product better, to get the feedback. I mean, after all, don't we want to make sure we have good performance in addition to the safety requirements? those are the things that we should be seeking out.
Agreed. So we have two questions popped up in the chat. I'm going to go with the easier one first. Louise asked about, yeah, when I talk about QMS review, I am talking about the management review, as it's referred to in the regs and the standards. I just wanted to differentiate management review for the business versus management review for the quality system, but that is what I'm talking about there. And then the more challenging question, Adiraj asked a question related to minimal viable product. I've not actually heard that term before, but I think I get the gist of what that is, which is kind of shooting for where's good enough, right? And if you quantify that and go, as long as we hit that, we're good, right? You don't want to be below the minimum, but minimum or above is fine. I think it's usually important to know where that line is. I just taught this. Mark and I both teach at St. Cloud State University in their master's degree program for medtech quality. And I actually just covered this the other night with my students. There's a consultant that I learned some stuff from named Tom Gilb, and he had came up with a method called Planguage, which is a way to kind of codify the elements of good requirements. And he does state that, yeah, you should know where is that minimum bar because you need to not go below it, but it shouldn't be the only target, right? That's like, all right, so we know we can't go any lower than this, but our goal should be here somewhere, right? And then part of his approach is, yeah, define that. Also define what would wild success look like. And by the way, what's the current best in the market? I'm hoping that would be below our objective. But yeah, if all you're focusing on, hey, we know where the minimum is, and anything above that, meeting that and above is success, not really indicative of, a strong quality culture there. Just doing enough at that point.
But a big part of this too, and Steve, your first bullet item talked about quality planning, design and development planning. I think there often in many organizations, we don't spend enough time reviewing those design and development inputs and really deciding which ones are the requirements for our product, right? And so this is the minimum, based on our customer input. This is the minimum things that all have to be in this product before we can release it. And that all has to work well, right? So, I mean, spending more time in a design and development input review to make sure that we have all those inputs identified that are the minimum requirements for us to have a product that will, be accepted to the market. On the other side of that, to some extent, we have to recognize also that a focus of a quality management system ought to be the continual improvement. And so there's always going to be those pieces that you're going to have for improvement, and moving to whether it's the next generation or those types of things. Understand that's built into your quality culture, is that I'm going to look for, where are the things that we haven't quite met the need and move on to that next thing. So even once you release the product and get to the market, you can't stop there. You have to be prepared. And if your organization has the good quality culture, you're going to know that that's going to be the next step, is going to be, what are we looking for improvement? And we aren't afraid of CAPA, corrective action, and we're not afraid of complaints. We're not afraid of that feedback. We want all of those things so we can improve, because you can't improve things you don't know about. And so you have to be prepared to gather that information and allow that to happen. Complaints on your product will happen, and it's your organization's decision on what to do with those that shows your quality culture.
Yep, excellent points. All right, continue on. Let's see. Just want to quick see in the chat here.
Yeah, I'll watch the chat. See.
Okay, great. Yep. So continuing around these indications, this one can seem counterintuitive in the world of quality, about procedures not providing flexibility. This one kind of stems from equating quality with quality control. Right? Quality control is not the totality of quality. There's quality management, there's quality assurance, and then there's your quality system. And I think too often, though, what happens is that's, quality control, that word control becomes the driver for everything. And that's where quality lives. If we can get total control, then of course we'll have good quality. And of course, nobody is perfect at being able to write the procedures. We can't predict all variability that could possibly occur. We can do our best brainstorming and hire the brightest people, and you're still going to have situations that pop up that you didn't account for. And if your procedures don't provide a mechanism for adjusting as you go or knowing how to make those decisions or who to talk to about them, that's when things will get very dysfunctional. I use this term dysfunctional compliance, where, and I'll talk about this later. Actually, it's the next bullet, where I'll just bring it up, right? Employees are warned not to deviate. We have written procedures and you will follow them exactly as written, and there is no such thing as deviations here. That's usually a pretty telltale sign that the quality culture is not where it needs to be, because it's sort of closing your eyes to the reality that stuff happens, right? You know, the universe is tough to figure out. You can't figure out all the variables. You can't control them all. But what you can do is be prepared and know, how will I deal with this dynamic environment where things are not likely to go, or maybe not even likely, but at times will not go where I want them to go. And your procedures, your processes, even to some degree your work instructions, should be prepared to allow for that. Not just, Wild West. Well, you can make a change in the decision anytime, but constraining, well, we understand this is probably where we don't have the best understanding of this process. So we're likely to see some variance. And here's what we would do. If you're at this point in the process and it's not clear what we're supposed to do based on the data we're getting, the information we're getting, here's what the next step should look like then, in terms of how to figure out what the next step actually should be. And then with that goes, only training employees to the procedures and nothing else, no conceptual training. Right? There's training and there's education, and you have to have both. Okay. Training, yes. All right. We teach them the how. Here's how we want you to do the work. Right. But the behind that should be, but we recognize there will be these opportunities where things might not match the procedure. Here's what that looks like. Here's who you can go to for information. By the way, let's talk about what we mean by root cause analysis, right? Those basic concepts. What is process-based thinking? What is the risk-based approach? We need to teach people kind of quality 101 in addition to these procedures. As I talk to a lot of companies, though, I'll see where they will, they'll do QMS training, right? And everybody gets 30 minutes. I was just recently, I was auditing a company, and that's what they're doing, 30 minutes of training on the QMS, and then an hour on every SOP or every work instruction that they're required to know. And I said, you really need to spend more time on that QMS stuff. Maybe it's a series of trainings, or again, a half a day, a full day, because that's the foundation, right? And when you think about the foundation's got to be larger than whatever it's supporting, in terms of breadth. So again, you've got to go beyond just training on the how and get to the why and the what behind everything.
And that's typically, I mean, lots of times my soapbox ends up being with clients is because truly, training is not a requirement in the state. Training is just a way to obtain the requirement, which is competence. And I mean, isn't that what we all want? We want to know that we have employees that know how to do their job, that aren't just simply, again, following a procedure. That's just not what's written. Because again, people tell me all the time, well, when the auditors are there, you have to have your procedure in front of you. Again, not a requirement. The problem comes in is that the auditor is going to have the procedure in front of them, and if you don't follow it in that way, they're going to have questions for you. So I mean, they have to know the procedure well enough to understand how it's supposed to work, not that they can follow it line by line, or worse yet, to me anyhow, memorize it. There was one question, Steve, on deviations.
Yeah, I just saw that. I'm going to come to that, but I just want to finish up a thought on what you were just talking about here.
Sure.
I don't know if everybody's familiar with Maslow. He was a psychiatrist, and he's kind of this hierarchy of thinking. And the training piece gets you knowledge, but there's more above that, like understanding, right? Comprehension, and then wisdom comes above that. In a good quality culture, people don't just have the knowledge, they have the wisdom, right? You want to get them to that level. But anyway, I don't want to do too deep a dive. And then Adiraj, yeah, I had a comment about a consultant during an audit didn't like the concept of a planned deviation. Um, I've never had that problem selling that idea. And I usually, if I design, a non-conformance or a deviation process, I do usually allow for both. The unplanned is the oops, right? And then how do we respond to that and go, how bad was that? And is it okay that we continue? Um, the planned deviations, though, play a very valuable role because it gets to things like, well, again, if there's this edict that thou shalt not deviate, then how would you pilot changes to a process? We're not allowed to deviate. So the only way to try something out would be to actually formally change the process, I guess, even if you don't know whether it's going to work or whether you want to stick with it. I find that plan deviations let you do things temporarily. All right, for the moment, we're going to add an extra inspection step in here so that we can gather some information. We don't want to permanently change the documentation of the process or the procedure, but we're going to add in a step temporarily. We're going to gather our data and then we're going to pull it back out. That to me is the role of a plan deviation, is it gives you that ability to do things temporarily. We go, yeah, we know this is not what our procedure says to do, but for a while, and here's why this is okay, we're going to do that. So I
Yeah,
think those who hate plan deviations are a little bit short-sighted, like the same people who say no deviations.
and
Okay,
and
Mark.
and having that, I mean, the purpose of I'll call it the plan deviation is that you have it all written down, what the conditions are that you're doing that plan deviation for, and then going from there. What you can't do is have an idea in your head and walk down to the floor and say, "Hey, I just want you to deviate here." No,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
have to
it's
have the written information of what you're doing and why you're doing it.
yeah. This flexibility I'm talking about, this ability to deviate when needed is under some sort of control. It's just not total control where there is no flexibility or no variability allowed. But yeah, so again, it's not the Wild West. You can do whatever you want because that doesn't work either. Definitely not in a regulated environment, but you should allow for, we know where we can allow certain types of events to occur. And now we know how to manage those and make sure that they go correctly.
And manage them without significant burden, because people will not use processes that create a lot of additional, unnecessary paperwork. But helping the people understand why you need to do it that way,
Mhm.
what the again, the minimum requirements for that documentation, all of that kind of stuff, and making it easy. Even giving, in the quality role, and the part of being the quality culture is that quality is that partner saying, yes, I can help you do that, and how do I make this easier for you?
Exactly. Which is a perfect segue into the next bullet, right? If there's this attitude, oh, quality, well, that's quality's problem, isn't it? Or quality, they're the police, so don't talk to them because all they know how to say is no. And the reality is, no, they do know how to say other things besides no, as long as you make them part of that process. Um, so yeah, as I talked about on one of the earlier slides, right? Everybody's got to understand and be accountable for their role in the quality system. And quality is there kind of as your expert guide, right? That team member that you can always go to and go, all right, I need to bounce something off you. But if that perception is, hey, it's quality's job to manage all of this. It's not my problem. If they don't catch it, it's not my fault. And I'm not going to ask them anything in advance because I know they're just going to tell me I can't do that. Right. But to Mark's point, and I have this on an upcoming slide about good practices, you have to just be careful about being too burdensome in that approach. And so quality does own, a portion of how they present themselves and the perceptions they create in order to enable a better quality culture out there.
On the flip side of that too, and I joke around it with some of our clients and talk about that the first answer that quality always gives is no. Quality and regulatory, we often get tagged as that's the first thing when somebody says, "Can I?" and you before they even finish the sentence, you say no. Don't be that person. Listen to what they have to say, and then help them, facilitate that in the right way. Again, being their partner rather than being the person that's stopping them and saying no or trying to create more burden. Let me help you do this. Here's the right form. Here's what we can put on these. Here's our risk-based rationale that we can put along with this. Be that facilitator rather than being the person standing there with their hand stopping people.
Excellent. All right. Excuse me. So I'm going to pause here for a second before I move on to the next, which is, so how do you address this? I'm just curious, if anybody wants to share any other indicators that they've noticed, that tells them that the quality culture is not really where it needs to be. If you want, you can just open up your mic, or if you want to type something in the chat. I'm just curious, what else have you experienced out there?
And we know we have some very experienced people in this kind of stuff. And, Russ, I see you on here. Maybe there's some other people. Karen, I know you've had a good amount of experience with this. Anybody else that wants to join?
This is Karen. You guys have alluded to it, where you'll have senior leadership who are so far removed from a process and the people, where they go, yeah, we have quality, and you do this will provide more value if you just do whatever. And they're like, no, it's that good enough, because they just do not understand how bad it may be, again, because they're so far removed from anything that's productive.
Yeah, so hold that thought, because the very first bullet on the next slide, I think, will help us address some of that. But I hear what you're saying, right? That they just have trouble understanding what we're talking about from the quality side of things.
And Steve, you see in the chat too, there's the piece about, they expect the quality part of the organization will fix any of the problems anyway.
Right. Yeah. Back to that thinking.
Yeah.
That's on the bottom bullet there. Great. Thanks, Karen. Thanks for
Russ, did you have something else to add?
No, I mean, I think it's as you said. I mean, it's it's meeting minimum requirements, and that and then we're good to go. So I think it's really understanding what the product is, what the customer wants to use it for, what the customer expectations are, and then driving the organization to meet those those high needs.
Yeah, agreed. And then again, right, that ties back to some of the bullets we put up, and there is this interconnectivity between a lot of these ideas that we're talking about here. You start to see there's a connective tissue in all of this. All right, so let's talk about some maybe practical ways you can approach this. So to Karen's point, and again, sometimes this is one of the problems with quality people, right, is that we forget that management has other priorities, right? And we want quality to be one of those priorities, but they have a certain language that they speak, and you need to be able to make sure that you can speak that language if you really want them to understand the importance of certain things, the value of certain things, right? And it's obvious, right? The language of management, right? Upper management, middle management is money. Yeah, things like CPKs and yields and that kind of stuff are really fascinating from a quality perspective, right? But your typical VPs and CXOs, whatever they are, right, they don't quite connect directly to that. If you talk about things like the costs of poor quality, right, and you can tie other types of metrics into competitiveness, right, or market share, there are ways to do that. And it's like learning any language, it takes some time to figure out how am I going to convey that. But it gets us past this. Management doesn't really seem to care perception, what quality has to say, and management goes, I have no idea what these quality people want. They just never seem to be satisfied. Somewhere in between, there's some common ground, and I think both sides, have some responsibility here to figure out how do we communicate that better. But I see a lot of this where quality just gets really frustrated because they're presenting these really clear metrics, and management's just going, okay, so why do I care about it? Why should I care?
I'll give you to me a very easy example of how you can do this. I went through the exercise of figuring out how much does a complaint cost the organization. So for instance, we came out with the number, and we're going to give you round numbers. It was $500 per complaint. So if we can reduce complaints by 50, we're saving a lot of money. So we can put it in that. And so we're no longer talking about complaints per million, CPK, all of those types of things. But we're talking about real dollars. So if it's going to cost me $5,000 and I save more than 10 complaints, then I've already got to break even on the first time I do this. Now, throw that over a number of years, all of a sudden you're starting to save some significant money, and you can see the impact on the organization that the quality group can have.
Yeah, I did something similar to company. It was around the cost of audit observations. So why do we need to care about continuous improvement? Why do we need to do a really good job with CAPA? And I broke it down by, well, when we get an observation, this is what it costs us to respond to that in some way. And it was dramatic. We went from, this was an organization where we were getting about a dozen NCs out of our notified body audits, and then knocked that down to one, a year later. And I said, this is what it cost us to achieve that. But now that we only have one, right, it isn't going to cost us as much. And it was the out of the ones before, it was like mostly majors and a couple of minors. Now we just had this one minor, right? We've learned more, and our ability to deal with that one minor has now gotten better. And the cost difference, I said, we just now are, by having put all that effort in over the last year to improve our processes so that we not just pass the audit, right? The audit just indicates that the quality system is being effective, but we are going to actually save money for the company by doing this and by focusing on these things. And previously the company was pretty lackadaisical about completing CAPA actions, and they just sort of lingered on. And I said, well, then you just keep extending, the cost of that. So yeah, there are those opportunities out there to put that into management's language. And then they start to go, this is why you keep telling me that quality provides business value. Now I start to connect those dots.
This is why often the quality organization gets tagged with the Lean and Six Sigma efforts and that kind of stuff, because those processes, those pieces often do put the cost with it. And so because they're putting it in that right language, that's the pieces that get funded, right? And so that's the growth of the Lean and the Six Sigma pieces. Now, just simply putting your quality, metrics in their language will help them much better understand why you want to drive some improvements, why you need some money for better measurement equipment. All of these types of things will help your organization understand. If you don't put it in there in that language, you're unlikely to get the resources necessary to do it. It's just a fact of the piece. And so helping, you can have a big impact on this to create that quality of culture simply by changing your language.
All right, we'll move on. All right. We've talked about how the customer drives everything, right? And understanding those requirements drives everything. Well, then you better make sure your employees know the customer. I see a lot of times, again, this is something that's held close to the vest at higher levels or just in certain functions like marketing, right? And it's like, we'll tell you what we need you to do. Trust us, we understand this stuff. Better quality organizations, where there's better, quality cultures, know to get that in front of everybody. Who is it we do this for? I want you thinking about them every, moment of the day. When I worked at Medtronic, I thought they were absolutely the best at this. It wasn't just one, they made sure we understood the technologies of our devices and products and services and the value they bring, but then they constantly put the customers in front of us, the actual patients in front of us, so we could see the impact and hear them talk about, your device enabled my life to get better, or my child's life, or whatever, my family member's life. There needs to be a way to communicate. The management needs to understand that everybody needs to see that. And, we talk about pride of workmanship, that's part of it. But if you just understood, especially in the regulated spaces, right, at the end of the day, I think we all know we have a potential to both positively and negatively impact, right, those that we serve. But you really need to hammer that home to create a culture that simply won't do the wrong thing, right? That we understand at the end of the day, no, I see some patient's face staring back at me when I'm trying to make a decision. And that will help us, better serve their needs, better identify and address the risks, right? Because we have to drive everything according to risks. But if I don't understand the environment I'm doing this in, then how do I participate in quality and in anything really that will lead to something good for the business? All right. So we talked about objective setting, right? And we get objective set. We each get our individual employee objectives for the year that we're going to be judged on in our performance reviews, and the company has objectives, and maybe your department does, or your division, right? And there's all these objectives flying around. And the problem is, in most companies, there's no connection between all those things. In a better quality culture, you would have a clear understanding that, hey, I was given this individual objective, which I know now ties to my department's objectives. And I know and I have clear understanding of how that supports functional objectives or divisional objectives. And there's a clear connection back to the corporate objectives that hopefully have been shared, right? Because those shouldn't be secret things. And that's another problem is often, because of this, the employees have zero understanding what the company, the corporate objectives are for the year. Sometimes they don't even know what the mission and the vision is, which is another whole topic. But in really good quality culture organizations, they make sure that the trail of breadcrumbs is there. And so that when an employee gets an objective, it's not just because, oh, I have to do this because I've been assigned it and that's all I know about it, versus, oh yeah, now I understand my contribution to achieving these other objectives, right? I've seen that in companies where they put profit sharing or some sort of, sharing, of the finances. And they say, so that's going to be based on, and here's 3 or 4 or 5 things, right, at the corporate level, right, performance wise, that, will determine how much of a profit sharing check you get. And a lot of times employees will look at that and go, how do I impact that thing, whatever it is? Because I go, I'm not involved in that. I don't see how I'm connected to it. And it's because nobody's bothered to think about, well, yeah, great. So you've shown the employees, we have a goal around market share. Okay. How does a production operator influence, the company's market share? How does somebody in the tooling room influence market share, right? How does somebody in quality influence market share? And it doesn't matter which role you are, if you haven't created that connectivity, then everybody's going to sit there and go, so my profit sharing is completely out of my control, I guess. And then what's the point, right? The idea of having the profit sharing is to incent people to help achieve those goals, and yet you've not tied them to those goals. So you need to make sure that everybody knows, in my branch of the tree, here's what that looks like, right? Here's that hierarchy of objectives, so that I know this is why it's important for me to get this objective done and done really well, because it's my piece of making sure these other objectives are successful.
And many of us have done, various leadership training and that kind of stuff in different organizations. This is something that's often called strategic deployment. In other words, each individual has their tactical things, their goals, and how does that feed, come down from the other pieces, and then, of course, go feed back up in the pieces. This is actually a requirement in the standard that, your quality policy sets the framework for your goals and objectives. So if your quality policy is aligned with your mission, all of these types of things, there's some natural connection there. If your organization doesn't have that quality culture and doesn't understand the connectedness of all of these pieces, this is why we're saying this is a key piece to build that quality culture, is create this connection for people so that they understand, how they're affecting, because the other piece is something called awareness, right? You're required to have awareness of how your role affects it. So when we did write pieces of the standard, we were incorporating some of this in understanding how to build a good quality culture.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, little things that get missed in the standards, and I always joke about people don't read the early sections very carefully, and there's a lot of good stuff in those sections. All right, so I've already talked about this one quite a bit, about the SOPs needing to provide flexibility. Work instructions are where you can create that consistency, right? We have things that, you know what, we absolutely need this to occur. Step one, step two, step three. Typically, this is in manufacturing operations more than anything else, laboratory procedures, things like that. You go, yeah, there is a role for that where you go, yeah, this is where we can't have deviation because it's got to be consistent and repeatable. But above that is the procedure. This is, well, these are the general activities and deliverables we're trying to create. And that's where you should allow for some of that flexibility. Now, again, with the work instructions, not everything needs a work instruction. Okay. But where you absolutely do need to establish solid control, then yes, the work instruction gives you that. But in the SOP level, and above, think about, can we identify, right? We can foresee what we don't know. And so here's where, or just a general, right? If it's something in the procedure that says, look, if a situation occurs that the procedure does not accommodate, then here's what you do. You stop. You identify who owns this procedure, right? And every procedure should have one owner, right? One owner. We understand there's lots of participants, but only one function owns that procedure, because that means their role is to provide guidance and interpretation when those options pop up and you go, now what do I do? Who do I ask? Well, who owns this process or this procedure? And now we can have that discussion. Or over time, as you learn enough, you go, all right, here's your options. If you run into this situation, which has happened, now we know you can go down one of these alternate paths based on this criteria, which you then have to document, right? Because if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. But now you've started to create that flexibility and you are more adaptive to what's happening in the real world.
Well, and I'll come back to when I talk again to our clients about this. A basic tenet of having an ISO quality management system is that you have to say what you're going to do and then show that you did what you said you were going to do. If you provide too much detail and create what I often call audit traps, you create a non-compliance for yourself by adding too much burden often. You can't fully comply with something that you've written. So you have to watch out for that from the quality perspective and creating that quality culture. On the other side of that is your partners in manufacturing operators and all the rest of the people should understand that they can come back to you when something isn't written correctly and for you to be able to do that update. I mean, you often see organizations that procedures and processes are still at Rev A or Rev 1. And I'm like, so you wrote it perfectly from the beginning? That doesn't seem really possible. It's just maybe you haven't gotten the feedback that something wasn't correct in there. And so be prepared to go to that next Rev and make sure that people understand that they can tell you if what you wrote doesn't actually work for them.
Agreed.
I have
Okay.
a quick question.
Yep. Go ahead.
How do you feel about, because I get mixed reviews on this, in a procedure putting, let's just say it's a quality procedure. We'll stick with like what I do, validation. If you have any questions, and I'm not going to say this right, but if you have any questions, please refer to the quality team, the validation team, whatever it is, putting that in a procedure. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that gets into, right. It's one thing, like I said, to have this edict, we will not deviate here. It's okay to say our goal is not to deviate, but when you make sure people understand, like Mark was just saying, when you run into something that would require you to deviate, here's who to go to figure out what to do, rather than either doing the horrible thing of done, well, I'm just going to do what the procedure says, even though I know it's going to lead to a bad result, or deviating and not telling anybody, right? That I think that's fine as long as now you're training people. It is, as Mark said, make it okay. You know what? If you identify that this procedure, this work instruction is not going to produce the right result, right? Or the situation does not work for what's documented, then give them the who do you call? Phone a friend, right? So I think that's good to say, yeah, not just you're allowed to speak up, but we've identified who you should speak up to for this particular process, procedure, or work instruction.
And so
Make it
something else-
easy to understand.
Something else just popped into my mind, Steve, about, indications that you may not have a good quality culture. If you're looking for somebody to blame for a problem, that's probably an indication that you don't have a good quality culture, right? We're not here to blame people. We know that it's really the system that we want to work, right? And so we're not looking at individuals. We're looking at, does the system work correctly for everybody? And so if there's a problem, help us identify it so we can correct the system.
Yeah. So this is a good segue in the next one, right? And I talked about this earlier.
5 minutes left, Steve, just so you're.
Yeah. Yep. I'm watching the clock. The training on the why, not just the how. And I think this also gets to what we were just talking about. If all the employees been trained to is these are the steps and I must follow them, and I don't understand why I'm doing this, I just know that I'm told to do it this way, their chance of even recognizing when something is incorrect or inappropriate for the situation decreases, right? And then they're not, now you couple with it, they don't know who to call, they don't know when to call, they just know they're supposed to do this, and then we're surprised by the results. Again, if you train them on, well, why are you doing this? That helps them step back and go, oh, I remember them saying the reason we do this way is because, and if I follow the steps given the current situation, that's not what we're going to get. That now tells me I need to step back and ask somebody about this, right? And maybe I'm misunderstanding it, or maybe I actually truly have encountered something that the procedure doesn't address. So that understanding of the how just creates that context for making good decisions there. All right, this is one of my favorite bullets in here. I always add this kind of thing in this, this kind of be bold kind of a approach to things. I like to refer to these guerrilla tactics in quality and leadership. And again, it's not about being violent. You're not bringing guns, and I know we sometimes feel like we should, but it's thinking like a guerrilla fighter. Guerrillas are good at stealthiness, right? About getting things done and getting people to do stuff without even realizing that they're doing it. Being persistent, right? They never give up the fight. Adapting, to the situation. As I said, this flexibility has to be there. And, the people who want to lead in those areas, building a following, not just I'm going to be a loose cannon, I'm going to help other people understand how they can join my force, right? And be part of that. And as I talked about having leadership without titles, right? Now you become a thought leader, right? Guerrilla leaders are typically the ones who have these interesting thoughts, and they help others understand how they can build them into their lives and become part of the effort. That kind of thinking can take you a long way, right? If rather than waiting for somebody in a higher level position to give you permission. I'm not saying you do something that jeopardizes your career, but there are ways to do that so that you can get small successes that'll get you closer to somebody above saying yes for the bigger picture kind of things.
And I'll fill in with this that, I mentioned earlier that often quality gets tagged with, being the no people, that they'll start off with no. To me, this is figure out a way to say yes, to be part of the team, so that they're doing it in the way that is best for the organization. And you can be alongside them in that, not have to be, the person that's saying no, but figure out a way to say yes.
Exactly. All right. And that takes us through to the end.